Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer on this Wednesday. Great to have you with us today. Post-debate analysis ahead. If you tracked the Democratic debate last night in Ohio, we were there. Our friends at 538 have just posted a new analysis on the winners and the losers in last night's debate, so we'll have that ahead. But first, we begin with the deteriorating situation now in Syria. The front lines in the fight against ISIS, that crisis now deepening after the U.S. pulled out its troops abruptly and the Turkish began their invasion earlier this week. President Trump facing a barrage of criticism for his decision made against the advice of military advisors, today defended the Turkish dictator and claimed the situation is, quote, very nicely under control.
President Erdogan's decision didn't surprise me because he's wanted to do that for a long time. He's been building up troops on the border with Syria for a long time, as you know. They've been warring for many years. It's unnatural for us, but it's sort of natural for them. Frankly, if Russia is going to help in protecting the Kurds, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So it's a very semi-complicated, not too complicated if you're smart, but it's a semi-complicated problem. And I think it's a problem that we have very nicely under control.
ABC's Ian Pannell has been reporting from inside Syria this week and says, contrary to President Trump's analysis, the situation is actually quite complicated and now deadly. And he says there are some serious repercussions for U.S. national security.
Hey, Devin, we've seen more fighting on the ground in northern Syria over the last 24 hours, in particular focused around these key border towns. There's this one stretch of land that President Erdogan said that he wanted to take to create a so-called safe zone, whereas the reality is it's a war zone that's taking place there right now. We've seen 160,000 people displaced from their homes in just over a week. We've seen dozens of people killed, possibly as many as hundreds of people killed. A lot of bodies are still trapped in the frontline position, so it's hard to get an accurate figure, and the fighting is still going on, and the longer it goes on, the messier and more complex it seems to become. So we know that US troops have now begun this withdrawal. Now they're saying it's an orderly withdrawal, but many people here would say it's an ignominious retreat. Either way, the Russians have moved in together with the Syrian regime to try and fill that void. They're working together with the Kurds on the ground, who are massively outnumbered and outgunned by the invading Turkish army and the militias that it supports. So we're seeing heavy skirmishing going on in different parts. President Erdogan said he wanted to go to this key border town of Manbij, but the Russians and the Syrian government forces, the regime forces, got there first. Today we've seen Russian military police even patrolling inside the very same town where US military vehicles were patrolling just a few days ago. And that gives you some sense of the geopolitical shift that we've seen in this region. Russia filling the void left by the United States. The US, the reputation of the US, its standing, the capacity for people to believe it has just diminished significantly. Not just here inside Syria, but elsewhere. People are looking on and saying, well, hang around, this is how you treated a key ally in the fight against ISIS. This is how you treated the group who did most of the fighting, most of the dying. Over 11,000 young men and women in a very small geographical area lost their lives in the fight against ISIS. And now you turn tail and leave. Many people regard that as betrayal. Many people see it as a sign that you can't take America's word. And we were talking to one local Kurdish commander, and he said, you know, Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator, had said to us, you can't trust the Americans. You know, you should unite back with the Syrian regime. And of course, they dismiss that because the Syrian regime has so much blood on its hands. Now they're looking to the Syrian regime to come in. And Bashar al-Assad and many other people are saying, you know what, he was right. So more fighting on the ground. President Erdogan is determined that he will not stop. There will be no ceasefire until he's established this so-called safe zone. But there is a potential middle ground there, where you could see a scenario where Kurdish forces are pulled back, Syrian government forces take over those border positions. So Turkey can say it's achieved what it wanted. It hasn't got the groups it describes as terrorists on the border. The Kurds can say they haven't made any major concessions because the land around that area is still held by the Kurds and their people. Devin?
Thanks to Ian Panel for that. I'm joined now by our senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez. Louis, great to have you here. I want to ask you about something the president brought up earlier about this situation at his press conference. He talked about those dozens of ISIS prisoners we've been hearing about that escaped from those prisons over there. He said someone just opened the doors to make the U.S. look bad. Any evidence of that from what you're hearing at the Pentagon?
No, there's no evidence of that, Devin. I think the implication there is that he's referring to the Kurds maybe opening the doors to the prisons that they have there in northern Syria, where they're housing up to 12,000 ISIS prisoners. No indications of that. That's actually what's happened. If anything, we were told that the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, that's the umbrella group for all of the Kurdish forces inside of Syria, that they are remaining at their posts, that they are there. Their numbers may have dwindled, but that they are still there. There has been a small number of ISIS detainees that have escaped, maybe in the dozens, as the president said, but it is believed that they were released because there was shelling on the part of the Turks near that prison facility, and that was why they were able to escape. It had nothing to do with the Kurdish guards themselves opening the gates and letting them out. So not the president not being accurate in making that statement.
Pretty incredible, though, to see that closed-circuit TV video of those prisoners fleeing their cells over there in Syria.
Well, I should bring up, Devin, that video that you're seeing, those are actually ISIS families. They were at a camp for internally displaced people, and that video, what they captured was like another shelling at one of those facilities, and they were able to move out as well. So just a key distinction there.
Yeah, certainly a distinction between the fighters and the families and their supporters, nonetheless imprisoned and fleeing in this situation, Louis. All of this, though, getting a lot of heat from Republicans. Mitt Romney, Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham, certainly an ally of the president, has been hammering him. Our John Carl also today asked the president about that criticism. Let's take a listen to a little bit of that.
I understand that the Secretary of State and the Vice President are on their way to meet with Mr. Erdogan. Look, the horses have left the barn. The reality is what's happening in Syria is a result of our decision. And that decision could have been very differently. So I'd like to know who was involved, what the thinking was, and why there was a decision made to pull out without a clear agreement with Turkey as to what they would do and what they would not do. But at this stage, to be saying, oh, gosh, we can't believe Turkey's doing what they're doing, we got to sanction them, is like, you got to be kidding. Of course this is what Turkey was going to do.
This is a defining moment of Trump's presidency. If we abandon the Kurds, it will be to our shame and to our national security detriment, and Trump will own the reemergence of ISIS. And I'm holding President Trump accountable to fix it. There is no substitute for American leadership.
Lindsey Graham just said of your remarks that you made in the Oval Office that if you keep talking like that, quote, this will be a disaster worse than Obama's decision to leave Iraq.
No, Lindsey Graham would like to stay in the Middle East for the next 1,000 years with thousands of soldiers and fighting other people's wars. I want to get out of the Middle East. I think Lindsey should focus right now on judiciary, like the Democrats. He ought to find out about what happened with Comey, what happened with McCabe, Lisa, what happened with Peter Strzok, what happened with President Obama, what happened with Brennan. That's what Lindsey ought to focus on.
That was our Jonathan Carl questioning President Trump this morning. Louis, notwithstanding the president's comments, Congress is moving ahead with taking a vote to try to pressure the president to reverse course in Syria. Kind of break that down for us. Is it possible for Congress to actually affect a military decision? And is it even not too late to get back involved over there if we wanted to?
I think the reality is that Congress can send a message by its votes. I think it was an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote critical of the withdrawal of the president's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from northern Syria. But I think effectively, I'm not sure that they'll be able to actually do something because the military comes under the executive branch. It falls under the president. He has the authority when he needs congressional authority when you need to use military force elsewhere. But in this case, he had that already. And so therefore, it's within his rights to move out those forces if he needs to. But of course, we've also seen that this president has gone back and forth multiple times when it comes to national security issues. And so it's always possible that he could at some point say, I will keep more troops or I will decide to reverse myself. But right now, he's been pretty adamant that he wants these U.S. troops out, that it is not an American fight. He keeps making the argument that U.S. troops went in there initially on a short-term basis to help in the fight against ISIS, and he's trying to compare this to long-term struggles going on in that part of the region between the Turks and the Kurds and the Syrians. And it's these are arguments that he's making, and he's pretty convinced that they are valid arguments. You heard him at that news conference say that he's claiming that this was brilliant strategy making in pulling out the U.S. troops from outside of Syria. But I think by these votes and by those comments from Republicans, many of people in his own party are not in agreement with that at all.
Hey, Louis, thank you so much. Also unclear how much people are digesting out in the middle of the country, this crisis in Syria. I'm just back from Westerville, Ohio. People still trying to make sense of all this, just as they are the impeachment battle that is underway this week on Capitol Hill. Who are lawmakers interviewing? What is this all about? Those are the questions people are asking, even as a new poll is out today showing a majority of Americans support the inquiry that's underway, the search for answers around the president's policy in Ukraine. As you see here, a majority of people think this is a good idea to do. Kira Phillips is here. She is our chief investigative reporter, and she has been all over this on the Hill. Kira, you know,
I know what you're going to say.
The names are
Too
coming
many
fast
names.
and furious. I can't even keep track of all of these State Department officials that are up on Capitol Hill today. But Brick, give us the bottom line. What is it all? Where are we at in this?
Well,
What's
it's hard
happening
for
right
us
now?
too, and we've actually been putting together a chart of all the people that have been testifying and what was their role and what is this really coming down to. And I mean, I can tell you that right now these key witnesses that are coming forward in this impeachment probe, I mean, they're going against what President Trump wants, and they're testifying and they're giving really interesting details about what exactly happened in Ukraine and this controversial phone call. And was the president holding back aid? Was there a quid pro quo in order for him to get dirt on Joe Biden, his 2020 rival? Okay.
It boils down to one guy.
It does. Rudy Giuliani, his personal attorney. He says, oh, I don't know if he's still my attorney. Rudy Giuliani tells me he is still the president's attorney. Okay, now I'm going to name 3 names. Just stay with me. I'm going to give just a quick glimpse of what has happened, and it's only Wednesday, right?
And these are all people that observed Rudy Giuliani's behavior in some way were informed
They all
about
had
it.
concerns. So first of all, we heard from former top Russian advisor Fiona Hill. She brought forward her concerns about Rudy Giuliani.
Earlier this week.
Why was he in Ukraine? Why was he hanging out with these questionable characters? What was in it for him? What was in it for the president? Why was he there dealing with policy issues? Then we had senior State Department official George Kent testified for nearly 10 hours. He relayed the same concerns. What was the deal with
And then
Rudy
today,
Giuliani?
this close aide to Mike
Michael
Pompeo.
McKinley. And here's what's interesting. Top aide to Pompeo. They've known each other a very long time. Pompeo actually brought him over to the State Department when he was actually U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan when Pompeo was the head of the CIA. He brought McKinley to be a top aide in the State Department because he trusted him. He wanted someone with foreign experience to be an aide. He is actually testifying right now. He was not happy with what he knew Pompeo knew and the lack of actions that Pompeo took in order to protect what was happening
So
there.
Democrats building a file of interviews and documents, talking to people that are inside the State Department, names you may not remember, don't really need to remember at this point as
But
they
they're
begin
getting
to
what they
build their
want.
case. They're getting what they want. And tomorrow, or Friday rather, could actually be one of the biggest figures of the week, this guy named Gordon Sondland,
Right.
who was a fundraiser for President Trump, is seen as something of a Trump ally and appeared in that text message chain
Very much so.
about this quid pro quo allegation.
Exactly. It was his text messages that got everybody's attention. And he was, of course, the U.S. ambassador to the EU. Good friends with the president, donated $1 million plus to his campaign. What is he going to say tomorrow? And the bottom line is that as you are seeing all these State Department representatives testifying, and now you're going to hear from Sondland, you know, was Trump truly working a quid pro quo? And it could come down to what Sondland has to say because he was
talking
so
to Trump.
connected.
So
exactly.
a big figure coming up. Kira Phillips, thanks so much. You know you'll be up there, so will you come back?
Okay.
Excellent. Excellent. Please do. Thank you so much. And we just heard on the Senate floor that the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, said that he is bound to take up any articles of impeachment should they make their way over from the House. So we will see where that goes. Next to the race to 2020 and the fourth Democratic presidential debate in the books. It was a record breaker. 12 candidates on stage last night in Westerville, Ohio, and there were a lot of fireworks. Elizabeth Warren center stage with frontrunner status. Really, for the first time, she got a pile-on. Mayor Pete, of course, came out with some sharp elbows. He did pretty well last night. Bernie Sanders making his debut after having a heart attack earlier in the week. We will break all of the subplots down with our political director, Rick Klein, who's here. Justin Gomez covers the Buttigieg campaign. He joins us from Iowa right now. And also, we're joined by Jeffrey Skelly from 538. And I want to start with you, Jeffrey, because you guys have just posted, you've done some instant analysis of the polls. You've talked to some voters that watched the debate, and you've got our list of winners and losers. Who are you liking as your winners from last night?
Right. Well, I mean, at the sort of the top of the list in terms of who won our highest average debate rating in our polling with Ipsos. So we asked people about the candidates and how they thought they did. Warren came in with the highest average rating among our respondents, and that's interesting also because she spoke by far the most of any of the candidates. So clearly, she didn't step on her own foot or anything. In fact, she came away with even more positive ratings than she entered the night with. In terms of candidates who stood out, in that sense, it's sort of who did better than expected based on what we knew about their favorability rating was Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar. The two of them improved their potential support. They had a high average rating. And so actually voters now say about a quarter of them in our polling said that they would consider voting for Buttigieg, and that's up from about 20%. Klobuchar was up to just a little over 10, having been at about 6 or 7. So she has a ways to go, but she took advantage of the fact that she did get to speak a lot last night.
And Rick, you wrote about your analysis of this today in the note. It was sort of the resurgence of the moderates in this race. We've seen a leftward swing, Elizabeth Warren rising to the top, but as Jeffrey was just talking about there, Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar having some pretty strong nights. What does that tell you about where we go from here in this
Joe
race?
Biden has some friends. If he's fighting against the leftward impulses of the party, there are people that aren't ready to give up on the center. And that may be in part because they're calculating that Joe Biden isn't going to last the distance, that people will be looking for another option. It may be a reaction to how much energy has been on the progressive left. You still have two of the three leading candidates in Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren who represent that. Together, they raised some $50 million in the last quarter. That is a big chunk of the party. And there are people that are offering an alternative, and they're doing it in different ways. And I think both the people you mentioned, Buttigieg and Klobuchar, using the Midwestern setting to say, this is how people around the country, the middle of the country, this is how they live. And it isn't the same way that you talk about policy or politics.
And also, we learned last night, Rick, that the strategies these two leading candidates have put forth, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, pretty smart plays in Iowa. They've been rising. They've been building their momentum over time, spending their money wisely, and also very deft with their attacks, I would say. Let's talk a little bit about Pete Buttigieg's attacks last night. He came in with a plan. He executed it. Here's a little bit of that.
The problem isn't the polls. The problem is the policy. And I don't need lessons from you on courage, political or personal. Everyone on this stage is determined to get something done. Everyone on this stage recognizes, or at least I thought we did, that the problem is not other Democrats who don't agree with your particular idea of how to handle this. The problem is the National Rifle Association and their enablers in Congress, and we should be united in taking the fight to them. That's your signature, Senator, is to have a plan for everything, except this. No plan has been laid out to explain how a multi-trillion-dollar hole in this Medicare for All plan that Senator Warren is putting forward is supposed to get filled in.
We need to get out, but we need to do this through a negotiated solution. There is no military solution in this region.
Respectfully, Congresswoman, I think that is dead wrong. The slaughter going on in Syria is not a consequence of American presence. It's a consequence of a withdrawal and a betrayal by this president of American allies and American values.
All right, let's go out to Iowa now with Justin Gomez, who covers the Buttigieg campaign. Justin, I take it that campaign is feeling pretty good today, and also they just announced some big fundraising overnight based on that performance.
Yeah, they did. $1 million in less than 24 hours since Buttigieg wrapped up that debate last night. They said they are receiving a lot of donations and that they're on track to raise about $100,000 per minute that he was on stage. They're saying he spoke, or not on stage, for how much he spoke last night. They're saying that he spoke for about a little over 13 minutes, so they're calculating that into it. But he's arriving back in the Midwest today, here in Iowa, where he's going to be holding a town hall and a roundtable on prescription drug costs. So expect for him to build off that momentum from the debate last night and really capitalize with some of these voters here. And he's going to be feeling really good when he shows up today.
Yeah, also dropped a lot of money just before the debate in Iowa, expanding that operation on the ground, opening offices, paying staff. So he's putting a lot of those chips on that first voting state. Thanks so much, Justin Gomez. Rick Klein, we can't move on from the debate without talking about impeachment. This was the first debate last night that had that issue hanging over it. And Joe Biden was pressed to explain and defend his son's behavior when he was vice president. Do you think he answered that question effectively?
Well, he answered it, and what was telling to me is that none of the other Democrats wanted to go there. It was the CNN moderators offered it up to some other candidates. They didn't go there. In fact, Cory Booker came back later in the debate to defend Joe Biden against an attack that wasn't even happening. None of these Democrats wanted to go where Donald Trump was obviously very explicitly leading them. To my mind, in any other debate cycle or any other election cycle, this would be an issue. People would be talking about why he got the business. But because President Trump is the one who's raising it, I feel like Democrats think it's kryptonite. Yeah. They don't want to be seen as doing Donald Trump's bidding, and therefore they're not touching it.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a bit surprised that even we couldn't get any of the candidates after the debate coming here on ABC News Live to talk about even the appearance of conflict of interest from people like Julian Castro and Amy Klobuchar, who are big advocates for transparency in politics, to even slightly ding Joe Biden for this one. Here's a little bit of that.
He answered that question, and he made clear now that his son isn't going to serve on any more boards. And I've also made clear that my daughter, who's way too young to serve on any boards, will never serve on a foreign board. But that aside, I am someone that believes what we really look at here is what was Donald Trump doing.
I thought he answered them well, and I agree with some on the stage who said, you know, why are we focused on that when we have a president who's committing crimes actively right now in office? And I think Joe Biden is an honorable man, that he and his family are honest.
So not taking the bait there, defending Joe Biden, even as they duke it out. Jeffrey Skelly at 538. Give us your hot take on where Joe Biden goes from here. He had sort of come into the fourth debate, seen a slip in fundraising. He faced a lot of these tough questions last night. What does your data show you from last night?
Yeah, well, in the polling we did with Ipsos, Biden did maybe slightly worse than expected, but overall his debate rating was higher than most. So I'm not really sure if this debate really was much of anything for his standing, as much as it was maybe for someone like Buttigieg or Klobuchar. At the same time, though, obviously the fundraising numbers are in the news today, and they don't look great for the former vice president at all. And so you see what what the polls look like in the early states, Iowa and New Hampshire. And, if he loses both of those, I mean, we're a ways from voting now, but I would be worried if I were him.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough couple of months before those first votes are cast. Jeffrey Skelly at 538, thank you so much. A really smart analysis on last night's debate up at 538.com. Rick, thanks for coming in with your smart analysis as well and the note. Moving on now, finally today we turn to the U.S. Supreme Court in a fascinating case involving one of the two D.C. snipers who went on a murderous 7-week rampage here in the Capital Region back in 2002. Lee Boyd Malvo, who is serving several life without parole sentences, that's him there on the left, today asked the U.S. Supreme Court for a chance at getting his life back. His argument? He says he deserves another chance to show that his youth impacted his decision. He was just 17 years old at the time of the crime when he and John Muhammad there went around in a car here in the Capital Region, sniping people with a gun, killing 10 and wounding 3. I'm joined now by Amy Nellis. She joins us here from the Sentencing Project just next door, and Brad Garrett, a former FBI agent and ABC News contributor who actually interviewed Lee Boyd Malvo. Great to see you guys.
Nice to be here.
Brad, let's start with you because you have the very interesting experience of actually speaking to this killer. And he is now claiming before the United States Supreme Court that he should get a shot of getting his life back. What was he like when you talked to him? Did you get the sense that he was an impressionable youth and this was sort of a bad decision he made because of that?
Well, yes. However, he came across as arrogant, controlling, and literally did not want to put the gun in Mohammed's hand. As we broke him down after a number of hours, he then started committing the different acts that we thought he committed around D.C. But the problem is he would never actually put Mohammed, he would put him there, but he pulled the trigger each time. So what has happened basically over the months and years is that now has flipped around, and he realized that he was basically brainwashed by Mohammed. Now, that doesn't take away the fact as to the number of people they killed, because it goes beyond D.C. There's basically 11 other crime scenes, 5 people dead around the country, so it's a big number.
And Ashley, your organization takes a look at the impact of life sentences for juveniles. In this case, Lee Boyd Malvo is serving several life sentences in 2 jurisdictions, but today's case was about the one that he received in Virginia. Should the door be open to revisiting those sentences now?
In my view, it should be, and here's why. Malvo's case was back in the early 2000s, and a lot has changed in the legal landscape since then. We still had the death penalty for juveniles back then, and Malvo was susceptible to getting executed. They chose life without parole, and they also have had a series of Supreme Court cases since he was originally sentenced that now invalidate life without parole for juveniles in a number of ways. And so he's going to the court and saying, but what about this way, the way that I was given the sentence? So it's really a legal matter rather than relitigating, the horribleness of his crime, which was indeed horrible.
And Brad, when I was at the court today as the justices heard arguments over this, and one of the issues boiled down to determining whether a youth that commits a crime, commits murder, is incorrigible or is simply too long gone. There's nothing we can do. How do you determine that when you interview somebody?
Okay, well, there's a bit of reasonableness going on here. Okay, the typical juvenile crime might be a murder, might be a robbery, etc. It's not 14 murders and crime scenes all over the country, so it's a bad example. Was he, as I mentioned earlier, brainwashed by Mohammed? I think the answer is yes. There's clearly, he's now figured that out. Kind of has his head. Do you think
he should get another shot here?
No. I think the sentence he's got is just fine, and I'll be shocked if the Supreme Court flips this around in any form or fashion. He's there for the duration.
I'll be surprised, but Ashley, before we let you go, give us the big picture on this, the number of juveniles serving life without parole because of crimes in this country. How big is that universe?
It's over 2,000. So Malvo is one case, one particularly horrific case, but many others stand to benefit from a favorable ruling, even if we know Malvo will never get out of prison.
Okay, fascinating conversation. Thank you both for coming in. A really interesting case. We'll now wait till June to hear how the Supreme Court decides. Brad Garrett, former FBI agent who interviewed Malvo, thank you so much. Ashley Nellis with the Sentencing Project next door here in Washington. Thanks for coming over, Ashley. And thank you for watching us on this very busy Wednesday here in the briefing room. We're here every day at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC News Live. Download the ABC News app. You can follow the latest on all the stories we've talked about today right there. You can watch us live commercial-free as well. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you next time.